the work that all of you do with regarding to helping individuals stay in their homes, to remain as independent as possible, to retain their personal autonomy in the community. And a number of the individuals with whom you work, I'm sure, are either veterans themselves or are individuals in the veteran's family. And so the goal of today's program is to talk about some of the benefits and programs and services available for those individuals that might be able to help them retain independence and to stay in the community longer, and to talk about the Division of Veterans Affairs and the services that we provide to help veterans and their families obtain, maintain, and retain those objectives. So let's get started with an overview of what the New York State demographic picture looks like for veterans and their families. Right now, according to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs estimates, there's around 900,000 veterans living in New York State. And as you can see from the slide, it's an older veterans population, by and large, living in New York State right now. There's more than 270,000 Vietnam-era veterans in New York State. Right now, New York has the 5th largest veterans population of any state in the country. What does that mean? It means that the chances that through your work you'll be interacting at some point in time with a veteran or somebody in a veteran's family are extremely high. And so therefore your knowledge of the benefits and programs and services that we're going to be talking about today is very important as far as giving the best possible services and the fullest possible services to your client. All right, so now let's look at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. We often hear about the VA in the news and in the newspapers, on TV, on radio, but it's actually a bit more of a multifaceted agency on the federal side than we often believe when we hear about it presented in the popular media. It's comprised of 3 branches: the Veterans Benefits Administration, dealing with disability compensation, VA pension, and any other compensable benefit, any monetary benefit going from the federal agency to the veteran and to his or her family. Then you have the Veterans Health Administrations. When you're looking at VA hospitals, VA community-based outpatient clinics, vet centers, VA nursing homes, those are all part of the Veterans Health Administration arm. Then the third arm, the National Cemetery Administration, the NCA, runs the National Cemetery Program, responsible for the upkeep, perpetual care of the nation's national cemeteries. 2 important notes. Number 1, you cannot ever assume that any one of those 3 branches is automatically talking to the other 2. So, for instance, you can't automatically assume that the Veterans Health Administration is automatically talking to the Veterans Benefits Administration, even if a veteran is receiving certain services from the Veterans Health Administration that would trigger certain benefits for that veteran. It's important to continually advocate and assist that veteran through the process and not make any assumptions that one branch is automatically talking to the other. And that's a large part of what our organization does. We are not part of the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs in any way. What we are is an advocacy organization as a state agency. We exist to help veterans and their families with obtaining the benefits and programs and services that they have earned through military service. Helping veterans, service members, and their families the rest of the way. Because it's a common issue that we have when they're in the military. People are telling them what to do and how to act and how to conduct themselves and what's available pretty much every step of the way. When they get out of the military, there aren't really any courses in how to be a veteran. And so a lot of times different benefits and programs and services can go either unused or underused simply because veterans and their families do not know what's out there. And our job is to help connect them with those benefits and to serve as their voice, as their advocates in helping them obtain those benefits. Okay, next slide. So our division has 68 field offices across New York State with the purpose of providing a statewide comprehensive service for veterans and their families. And by the way, if anybody out there is an app user, either on iPhones or on Android, we actually have a new free download New York State Veterans App, which you can easily obtain just by typing in NYS Veterans or New York State Veterans or New York Veterans or anything like that in the search bar of either the Google Store or the iPhone Store. And one of the neat features that we have on the app to really localize our services is if you push the button on the app that's marked Near Me, within seconds you will get a listing of all of the New York State offices and county offices for veteran services that are closest to that individual's geographic position at that moment. And so it's a good opportunity to find out what veterans programs and services are available from our division and from the county veteran service agencies right in the app user's own backyard. The Division of Veterans Affairs right now has 56 employees accredited to represent claimants before the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, in claims and appeals. That's very important because federal law requires that an individual must have VA accreditation in order to represent somebody, either a veteran or his or her family, before the VA in a claim or an appeal for benefits. So if you're looking out there at the various services that might be available for veterans and their families, and you see somebody advertising services and saying, oh yes, I help veterans do their claims, either for free or with a cost, it's important that you do your research to make certain that that individual has their VA accreditation. If they do not have that accreditation, they are actually barred by federal law from representing veterans and their families in these VA claims. And of course, with our agency, any services that we provide to veterans and their families are 100% free of charge. They will never be asked for any money of any kind from any of our employees. Just a sense of our reach as far as helping veterans and their families. Last year we obtained approximately $75 million in VA benefits for our clients. And in addition to the federal side, the VA benefits are also subject matter experts in veterans benefits offered by New York State. And one thing that I'll do at the conclusion of this webinar is I have compiled a booklet. It's about 193 long now, I think, is like the current total, of all of the New York State statutes that directly affect veterans and their families. These statutes appear in multiple areas of the law, and so it's rather difficult to get a handle on where exactly these benefits and programs are. This guide provides an easier means of access for you. They're all in one place. There's a table of contents in the beginning of the booklet which lists the different benefits by topic. And so I'll be sending that out at the end of the presentation. And of course, if you have any questions regarding those statutes, once you start combing through them, my contact information is provided in the final slide, and feel free to contact me anytime to discuss those further. Next slide. When we talk about a VA claim, it begins at the VA regional office level. New York State has two regional offices that the VA operates. One is in New York City, one is in Buffalo. All of the claims from the eastern side of the state go to the VA regional office in New York City. All of the claims from the western side of the state, by and large, go to the VA regional office in Buffalo. If the VA regional office decides the claim and the veteran disagrees with the claim, the veteran then has a right of administrative appeal. That can go to a decision review officer, or it can go to the Board of Veterans' Appeals. Our agency represents veterans and their families at both of those levels. Beyond that, the areas that get beyond the scope of our representation are the actual judicial levels, going to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, and then potentially on to the Federal Circuit, Court of Appeals, and then in rare circumstances, even as high as the U.S. Supreme Court. Our goal really is to do it right the first time, to make certain that everything that the veteran can possibly submit in support of his or her claim is provided to the VA at the regional office level, so the regional office has everything necessary for them to make the right decision the first time and provide a complete and accurate decision to the veteran. But then, of course, if there's something wrong with the initial decision, we do have representation for them at both the decision review officer level and the Board of Veterans' Appeals level as well. Next slide. When we talk about veterans, who are we talking about? The definitions become somewhat nuanced in the law. Under federal law, a veteran is a person who served in the active military, naval, or air service and who was discharged or released under conditions other than dishonorable. when we talk about discharge, a lot of times we'll think there's only two different types of discharge, honorable and dishonorable, black and white. That actually is not the case. There are various levels of discharge. And so when we're talking about conditions other than dishonorable, let's say you have a veteran who comes in who has a general discharge under honorable conditions. That veteran most likely is going to be eligible for most of the benefits that the VA offers. So even though that veteran's discharge paperwork, which is known as a Department of Defense Form 214, or there's also some different numbers for the older forms during the World War II and Korean War era, even though it doesn't say the word honorable by itself right there in the character of discharge block, that veteran is still going to be eligible for a large number of veterans benefits and programs and services, and our agency can certainly help that veteran obtain those benefits and programs and services for which he or she is eligible. What about National Guard? For the most part, when you're talking about National Guard members or reservists, that's deemed to not be active duty service under the federal definition. So for the most part, National Guard members or reservists are not included in the definition of veteran under federal law. However, if you have somebody who was in the National Guard who was then activated, put on what's called Title 10 status, referring to Title 10 of the U.S. Code, and given active duty orders, that individual will qualify as a veteran because he or she will have served in the active military, naval, or air service, and thus will have met that component of the federal definition. So if somebody says, I was in the National Guard, don't automatically assume that they're not eligible, because if they were activated, they most likely will be eligible for most, if not all, of the benefits and programs that the VA offers. Now, what about under New York State law? New York State law becomes a bit more challenging. I've identified at least 6 different definitions of the word veteran within New York State law. And it depends on the different benefit or program or service the veteran is seeking. And so later in the presentation, we'll talk about some of the different New York State benefits and programs and services for veterans and their families, and we'll discuss the different definitions that are applicable to each of those benefits. And as you will see when you go through the lengthy booklet of the different veterans' laws, you'll see those different definitions and how they play out. Okay, so some common federal benefits with which DVA assists. Probably the most common benefit that we hear about are VA disability compensation benefits, both for veterans and for their survivors. So disability compensation itself is a tax-free monthly payment to a veteran due to a service-connected disability incurred or aggravated by military service. Dependency and indemnity compensation, abbreviated usually as DIC, is a tax-free monthly payment to a survivor, to a widow, a child, or a parent of a veteran because of that veteran's service-connected death. So let's go into some more detail about what we're talking about with both of those definitions. When you talk about a disability compensation claim, there are 3 major parts to that claim. It's kind of like building a 3-legged stool. You have to have all 3 legs formed in a sturdy manner in order for the stool to stand upright. Part 1, you need to have a disability or disease that is incurred or aggravated in qualifying military service. Secondly, you have to have a current disability. You can't file a disability compensation claim for a disability that you had 5 years ago and were cured of. It has to be a current condition for which you're applying. And the third and the most important part of building that 3-legged stool is a nexus, a link between military service and the current disabling condition. You have to prove to the satisfaction of the VA that your current disabling condition was at least as likely as not linked to your qualifying military service. And building that nexus and providing evidence of that nexus really is one of the most fundamental things that we do in the Division of Veterans Affairs when we prepare these claims for the VA to review. The VA system is built to be a pro-claimant system. One example of that is if the evidence on both sides of the case, both for awarding the disability compensation or against awarding the compensation, is in balance, it's equal on both sides, then the tie goes to the claimant. If the VA says, yeah, this truly is equilibrium on both sides of this argument, then the VA is required by law and by regulation to decide in the claimant's favor. Next slide. This is a popular slide. This is the show me the money slide. Just to get a sense of what we're talking about as you go up the ladder in the severity of a veteran's disability compensation. The VA will rate the veteran's disability between 0% and 100%, with 100% being the most severe. And it's important to note that all of these payments are tax-free. This is tax-free money coming into the veteran's household. And so this can become a true game changer for veterans and their families, because when you have these monthly payments coming in from the VA, tax-free, that's a significant amount of money coming into the household, and that can help a veteran and his or her family remain independent in the community for a longer time. Importantly also, you look at the 30% rating, you start seeing a higher payment for a veteran with a spouse. Once you are 30% disabled in the VA's estimation or higher, you get an increased amount of money from the VA if you have a dependent spouse. And so you see those two different rates in the columns throughout the rest of the chart, between 30% and 100%. There's also additional payments available if the veteran has dependent children up to the age of 18, or dependent children between the ages of 18 and 23 who are still attending school. Next slide. Presumptive conditions. This is actually a fairly recent development in the scheme of the VA's existence. The VA now presumes that certain disabilities were definitely caused by military service. What does that mean? It means that when you're looking at those three elements of a disability compensation claim, building that three-legged stool, it actually makes it easier on the veteran and his or her advocate, because all you have to show is the veteran currently has this condition and the veteran served in the military during a certain time period and, in certain cases, geographic location of military service. It removes the advocate's need and the veteran's need to prove that nexus, that link between the disability and the veteran's military duties. Next slide. So some of the most common presumptive conditions. The one that everyone who works in this space, or even anywhere near this space, hears about is Agent Orange. There are several presumptive conditions for veterans who served, quote-unquote, boots on the ground or on the inland waterways in Vietnam. So if you see a veteran whose military record includes time serving at any point in time during the Vietnam era, in Vietnam, on the land in Vietnam, or on ships in the inland waterways in Vietnam, that individual may have a presumptive disabling condition for which he or she is entitled to disability compensation. Some of the most common Agent Orange presumptive conditions include things like prostate cancer, type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's disease, Hodgkin's disease, ischemic heart disease, and there's several others. The full list is contained right in the Code of Federal Regulations. And so if you have veterans who have those disabilities and served boots on the ground in Vietnam or on the inland waterways, that veteran is entitled to disability compensation. There's no need to provide additional evidence showing that there's a medical link between those two, because the VA presumes that link. Other presumptives. There's a number of conditions related to mustard gas exposure. There are 24 conditions related to exposure to ionizing radiation. Right now, with our current conflicts, the Persian Gulf War, that's the first Desert Storm, the first Iraq War. It also encompasses Afghanistan, the second Iraq War. There's 25 conditions that the VA deems to be presumptive. And of course, for additional information on that, our employees, our 68 field offices, are trained to know those conditions and to recognize veterans who have those conditions and help them apply for disability compensation. One of the most interesting ones, one of the most widespread ones, is ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. That's a presumptive condition for every veteran, regardless of when that veteran served, regardless of where that veteran served. If a veteran has Lou Gehrig's disease, that condition is presumed to be service-connected, and the VA will actually fast-track those claims to ensure that the veteran receives that disability compensation payments. Next slide. Now we're getting into the survivor's side of things on the compensation realm, dependency and indemnity compensation, or DIC. Again, this is a tax-free monthly payment made to a widow, child, or parent of a veteran because of that veteran's service-connected death. To qualify, the spouse must be married to the veteran for at least 1 year prior to the veteran's death, or have had a child with the veteran. For a dependent child to qualify, that child must be either under the age of 18 or between the ages of 18 and 23 and attending school. Now moving on to a completely different universe in the veterans benefits realm, VA pension. In the VA disability compensation realm, we talked all about medical conditions, service-connected disabilities. There is no income requirement whatsoever for a veteran to obtain VA disability compensation. There is no income requirement whatsoever for a surviving spouse or child or parent to obtain DIC. Those are entirely based on medical disabilities. VA pension is different. VA pension is a tax-free monthly payment based on the financial need of a wartime veteran or a veteran's widow or children for a non-service-connected disability or death. Basically, in a nutshell, what we're talking about here when we talk about income for VA pension purposes, you have the total income coming into the household minus any unreimbursed medical expenses. So money that's being spent on medical care that's not being reimbursed by any insurance policy. That equals the VA's calculation of household income for VA pension purposes. Again, that's kind of a rough nutshell example of how the calculation works. There are certain nuances that we'll talk about in a little bit, but that's basically how the VA calculates income for pension purposes. Eligibility. When we talk about length of service, if the veteran served prior to September 7th, 1980, 90 days of active duty military service with at least 1 day of wartime service qualifies for the length of service requirement for pension eligibility. If the military service was after September 7th, 1980, it's a little bit harder to qualify. It has to be 24 months on active duty or the full period to which the individual was ordered to active duty, again with at least 1 day of wartime service. But here's a common misconception. A lot of times veterans and their families hear wartime service and they immediately equate wartime service with combat service. That in fact is not the case. Wartime service refers to service during a period of war as defined by the U.S. Congress, regardless of where that veteran served. So that veteran could be stationed right here in New York State at Fort Drum. As long as that service occurred for at least 1 day during a wartime period, that veteran meets the wartime service requirement for VA pension eligibility. Wartime service does not mean you have to go into a combat zone to qualify. Next slide. Now we get into the income questions. Income and net worth. The VA looks at both. The veteran's income and assets, or the surviving spouse or child's income and assets, must fall below an annual threshold set by Congress. When we look at assets, generally speaking, we're talking about a level below $80,000 in household assets. When we talk about reportable income and assets to the VA, what the VA considers for pension eligibility, it includes pretty much everything. It includes what's in your bank accounts, savings and checking accounts. It includes stocks, bonds, mutual funds, annuities, any property other than your residence in a reasonable lot area, So the VA is calculating a lot here when they're looking at pension eligibility. One important thing to remember, though, this will come back later when we talk about New York State's blind annuity benefit for blinded wartime veterans and for their unremarried surviving spouses. Any money that is received by a veteran or his or her spouse in blind annuity benefits, that does not count against the veteran's eligibility for a VA pension. So that money does not go into the income calculation at all. The VA does not have any look-back provision when it comes to determining pension eligibility. This makes a VA pension very different from Medicaid, which of course has a significant look-back provision to see if you were transferring any assets within that look-back window. Now, it's important to remember, though, that even though a VA pension does not have that look-back provision, if a veteran and or his or her family all of a sudden starts transferring large amounts of assets just to qualify for a VA pension, that could have some significant consequences on the Medicaid front. And so it's important, as you're looking at a holistic plan of care for a veteran and his or her family, to say, okay, how will that transfer of assets affect your Medicaid eligibility? And a decision has to be made on a case-by-case basis with the veteran and his or her family. Is transferring assets at the last minute, so to speak, the best option here? Or will the Medicaid consequences based on Medicaid's look-back provision significant enough that it's worth losing out on the pension eligibility to not have to deal with the Medicaid consequences? And again, that's a case-by-case basis. It depends on each veteran and each surviving spouse's current situation. The income and asset thresholds that Congress set depends on how many dependents live in the veteran's household. So if you have a veteran living alone, the threshold is going to be lower than a veteran living with dependents as far as what that veteran can have in household income. Next slide. The VA also has something called the Special Pensions Program. That refers to two different additional pensions, aid and attendance or permanently housebound. When you're looking at aid and attendance, we're talking about individuals who require assistance with at least two activities of daily living. We're talking about individuals who are in a nursing home because of mental or physical incapacity, individuals needing assistance with medication management, inability to bathe themselves, inability to dress themselves, incontinence, limited ability or inability to ambulate, to move around from place to place, inability to feed oneself, also individuals who are legally blind. Those are all ways to qualify for aid and attendance. And if you can demonstrate that to the VA and you meet all of the other qualifications for a VA pension in terms of the income limit, the wartime service, the total length of service, and all of that, you can receive an additional amount of money in this special pension from the VA. And there are special pensions available for the surviving spouse of a veteran as well. The VA refers to those as death pensions. Next slide. Again, we're looking at the show me the money slide with the VA pension payment rates. And so you see on that slide the income limits for veterans to qualify for a VA pension, especially if the veteran is living alone with no dependents. It's a fairly low income threshold that Congress sets. But if you have veterans who are living below those income thresholds, again, this is a very important tax-free benefit that they should be receiving. And when it comes to the special pensions, like aid and attendance, those benefits are proven to be some of the most underutilized benefits in the entire VA system. And they can provide a tremendous benefit for the veteran and his or her family if they qualify. And so if you're working with veterans who have very low income and who need assistance with at least two activities of daily living, you should be thinking about having that veteran speak to somebody with the Division of Veterans Affairs to find out if that individual should be filing a claim for not only VA pension, but VA pension with aid and attendance. Also, if you have a veteran with whom you are working who's paying a lot of money out of pocket with medical expenses, again, the VA will deduct unreimbursed medical expenses from the household income to get that final income tally. So you can get sort of a spend down effect where you can get below that income threshold if the veteran is paying a lot of money out of pocket for medical expenses, or if the veteran's surviving spouse is paying a lot of money out of pocket for unreimbursed medical expenses. So to be deducted, the medical expenses must exceed 5% of the maximum annual pension rate set by Congress. So with a veteran, you're talking about $643 or $842 if they have a dependent in the household. With the spouse, it's $431 or $564 with a dependent in the household in medical expenses. Next slide. Shifting gears again, now we're moving on to the post-9/11 GI Bill, and we'll talk about some education benefits, because when you're working with individuals of varying ages in the independent living context, one of the most important things that might be available for that person is the possibility of getting education benefits to pursue a higher education degree, either at the college or university level or through vocational training. So the post-9/11 GI Bill is available for veterans who served after September 10th, 2001, as the post-9/11 label implies. And the full benefit is available for a veteran who served during that time period for either an aggregate of at least 36 months of active duty military service or 30 continuous days of active duty military service plus an honorable discharge for a service-connected disability. Looking at that first bullet point, the aggregate point, what does that mean? It refers to a situation where, say, the veteran is in for a full year, 12 months of active duty, then is discharged honorably from military service, and then re-enters the military and serves for 24 more months of continuous active duty. In that situation, that veteran would qualify for the post-9/11 GI Bill because you have 12 months initially plus 24 months after that. Added together, you get 36 months in aggregate of active duty military service. So that helps cover those veterans who are in for a period of time, leave the military, and then go back in. Next slide. As far as the VA benefits go, this is one of the most comprehensive benefits programs in existence. It includes full tuition and fees paid directly to the school for all students who are attending a public school. It includes an annual stipend for books and supplies. It includes a monthly housing allowance paid to that veteran, and the housing allowance is calculated to be equal to the basic housing allowance for somebody who reaches the rank of E5 within the zip code where that school is located. And it even includes, under certain circumstances, a one-time payment of $500 to cover moving expenses. So let's say the veteran is moving from a very rural area into an urban area to attend school. In that situation, if you have that kind of a significant move, the VA will, through the post-9/11 GI Bill, pay $500 to help cover those moving expenses on top of the books and supplies stipend, on top of the monthly housing allowance, and on top of the tuition and fees. And it's important to note that when you're looking at public schools in New York State, let's say you're a veteran who is not a New York State resident, but you're attending a New York State school in either the SUNY or CUNY system. Under New York State law, and now under federal law as well, that veteran has to receive the in-state tuition rate, meaning that the veteran's not going to have to be paying any additional money out of pocket. The GI Bill is going to cover the full amount of tuition and fees paid directly to the school. Next slide. What if you have a veteran who didn't serve for that full length of time that's required to receive the 100% maximum benefit under the GI Bill. You can still receive partial funding under the GI Bill, and you can see on this slide how long you have to serve in total in the military on active duty in order to receive what percentage of the bill. So if you're in for 30 total months, it's 90% of the total benefit. If you're in for 24 total months, it's 80% of the benefit, and so on. A lot of veterans have a misconception that if they weren't in for that full 36 months of active duty, they're not eligible for anything under the GI Bill. That is not the case. You can still receive that partial amount of money and benefits from the GI Bill depending on how long you were in, as long as you were in for at least 90 days. One important warning, though, as far as time deadlines. In order to utilize your post-9/11 GI Bill benefits, you have to use those benefits within 15 years of your date of discharge from the military. So you have that 15-year window to get your application in to the VA. Otherwise, you're not eligible to receive those benefits. So it's important to keep track of that window and to make sure you file that application, because it's a very important benefit to utilize as far as going back and receiving an education. Another education benefit beyond the post-9/11 GI Bill is vocational rehabilitation. This is a federal program administered by the VA to help eligible disabled veterans get and retain lasting, suitable, sustainable jobs. It also is able to help seriously disabled veterans achieve independence in daily living, which I know dovetails nicely with the mission of your organization, looking at finding ways to help individuals retain that level of independence in their lives. To qualify for vocational rehabilitation, the veteran must receive a service-connected disability rating of 20% or greater from the VA, or must receive a rating of 10% from the VA with what the VA deems to be a serious employment handicap. What does that mean? Well, it depends. It's one of those eye of the beholder types of classifications. The VA will make the final determination of whether an individual's disability provides a significant barrier for that individual in obtaining a lasting, suitable job, given his or her skill set. And one of the things that our agency can do is to serve as an advocate for veterans who are looking to apply for vocational rehabilitation, to help make that strong case to the VA to show, yes, this particular disability does qualify as a serious employment handicap, so even if the veteran is not rated at 20% or more, that veteran should still receive vocational rehabilitation from the VA. Next slide. When an individual does qualify for vocational rehabilitation, the VA will pay the training costs for that individual to include tuition and fees, books, supplies, necessary equipment for that individual's training. And the VA will also provide a subsistence allowance to help that veteran in his or her day-to-day living. Again, like with the post-9/11 GI Bill, there is a time window in which this benefit must be used, and the eligibility here lasts for 12 years from the date of the veteran's separation from active duty military service, or 12 years from the date of the VA's notification of the veteran's service-connected disability rating. So let's say the veteran has left military service more than 20 years ago, but all of a sudden the veteran realizes that he or she is eligible for disability compensation, and there is no time limit whatsoever on when the veteran can apply for disability compensation. So the veteran applies for disability compensation and receives a 40% rating from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Now that veteran has 12 years from the date when the VA notifies him or her of that 40% rating to apply for vocational rehabilitation. In addition to that, a veteran can, under certain circumstances, get a time extension beyond that 12 years. if the veteran can prove to his or her vocational rehabilitation counselor with the VA that the veteran has a, quote, serious employment handicap that prevented that veteran from using his or her benefits sooner. And again, this is an area where the Division of Veterans Affairs, as an advocate, can step in and help the veteran make the case that there is a reason, because of that veteran's serious employment handicap, that he or she could not use the vocational rehabilitation benefits sooner. Next slide. Now we're moving on to VA healthcare eligibility. So thinking back to that slide with the three branches, we're looking primarily now at the Veterans Health Administration, the VHA. For eligibility, you're looking at active duty service under Title 10, or also service qualifying under Title 32, Section 502F of the U.S. Code. The character of discharge, again, we're looking at other than dishonorable. So we're looking at individuals discharged with an honorable discharge, general under honorable discharge, or a discharge under honorable conditions. Once again, it can be a discharge classification that says something besides just plain straight up honorable. That veteran still might be eligible. There's also a length of service requirement, kind of like with the VA pension for healthcare eligibility, only here it's if the service took place prior to 1980, the veteran must have completed his or her full period of military service. And for veterans who enlisted after September 11th, 1980, or entered active duty after October 16th, 1981, must complete 24 continuous months on active duty, or the full period for which they were called to active duty military service. Next slide. This looks at what the VA healthcare programs can do for you in a nutshell. Again, this is a very brief overview of the different programs and services that the VA healthcare system offers. When you're looking at what the VA system provides as far as healthcare, it's a wide range of services ranging from primary care all the way through multiple forms of specialty care. There's mental health counseling available at VA medical centers, and there's many VA medical centers located across New York State, as well as community-based outpatient clinics, and at vet centers. And again, there's multiple vet centers located across New York State. It provides low-cost dental insurance. It offers low copays to veterans. Some are actually free of copays, depending on the veteran's situation, to copays for $15 for primary care, $50 for specialty care, and between $9 and $12 for pharmaceuticals. There are audiology services that the VA offers. There's a telehealth program that the VA offers for veterans who are otherwise unable to receive a consultation with a specialist. The veteran can go to a location that's an outpatient clinic, or in some cases even in the veteran's home, and the VA will link that veteran with a specialist at some remote location and allow that veteran to have a consultation through the telehealth system with that specialist. The VA actually was one of the first healthcare systems out there to engage fully in this telehealth or telemedicine concept. Something else that the VA provides that really is germane to the work that you do is there are a number of home health care programs that the VA offers. The VA has a home health aid system where they contract with an organization of home health care aides, and qualifying veterans are able to have somebody come into their home, work with a registered nurse on a plan of care based on the veteran's daily living needs, and then to have that home health aide coming in on a regular basis to provide skilled services and help with activities of daily living. You know, we're talking everything from bathing, dressing, fixing meals, taking medications, moving from place to place. And it's a very useful program, especially for veterans who are isolated in some way, either geographically or otherwise, or who have a caregiver who just has reached a point where he or she is not able to provide the best quality level of care to that veteran any longer. And so the VA will come, they'll make a needs assessment with the veteran and, if applicable, with the veteran's caregiver, figure out what activities of daily living are needed for assistance, and then make a plan of how often that home health aide is going to be coming to work one-on-one with the veteran in his or her house. And again, the actual plan of how frequently the service takes place is based on a case-by-case basis. But it's a very useful service that's out there. The copays are low, as we saw in the last slide. And in certain situations, the copays might even be free. So if you have a veteran with a service-connected disability rating of 50% or higher from the VA, that veteran receives free VA health care, no copays. If the veteran has limited income and limited assets enough to qualify for a VA pension, that veteran receives free VA health care. Now, if you have a veteran receiving VA health care for non-service connected conditions who does not meet those requirements, that veteran generally will need to pay a copay, but again, as we saw before, those copays are relatively low. Also, it's important to note that if a veteran is going to a VA medical facility for care, the copay is a single charge per visit. So that means if the veteran goes to, say, the VA Medical Center here in Albany on one day and meets with 4 different healthcare providers in that facility on the same day, that veteran is going to be paying only one copay. It's a single charge per visit. It doesn't matter how many healthcare providers that veteran sees during that visit. So it can be useful, depending on the veteran's situation, to try and schedule multiple visits to different providers within one visit to a healthcare center, because you're only paying that copay one time. Also, there may be travel reimbursements available for a veteran going to and from a VA medical facility. If a veteran has a disability rating of 30% or higher, if a veteran is traveling to the facility for a scheduled examination to determine eligibility for VA disability compensation or VA pension, if the veteran is traveling to the facility to receive care for a service-connected disability, or if the veteran meets the income requirements for a VA pension, you get that reimbursement for travel to and from a VA medical facility. Next slide. The VA's vet centers, I mentioned earlier, it's a very important health resource for veterans and for their families, especially on the mental health level. The services include individual counseling and group counseling and therapy for veterans and for their families, family counseling for a wide range of military-related mental health issues, bereavement counseling for families who experience an active duty death, military sexual trauma counseling and referrals for proper services, substance abuse assessments and referrals for proper services, and it goes on from there. And I have personally interacted with many veterans who have utilized the vet centers to tremendous success, especially if you have individuals who are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, with traumatic brain injury, with depression, with anxiety disorders that are linked to their military service, and so on. And you'll see 2 different phone numbers on there. Those are hotlines that you can call to determine the location of the VA vet center that's nearest to that veteran's geographic location. So that way you aren't traveling an undue distance as the veteran to reach one of these locations. Now we're shifting gears into the New York State side. And again, there are other federal benefits out there with which DVA assists, but that's sort of an overview of some of the most common ones that our employees are accredited to assist with. I mentioned earlier the blind annuity benefit that New York State offers for blinded wartime veterans and for their unremarried surviving spouses. To qualify, the veteran must serve for at least 90 days in active duty or receive a discharge from the military because of a service-connected disability. Importantly, again, this is a common misconception that veterans have, the veteran's blindness does not need to be service-connected in order to qualify for the blind annuity benefit. There's no requirement that you have to show the New York State government that your blindness was in any way, shape, or form linked to military service. As long as you meet the wartime service requirement and the length of service requirement and you are a legally blind veteran, you qualify for this annuity. There's no need to show service connection at all. And the applicant must be a New York State resident in order to qualify for this benefit. As I mentioned earlier, this is a benefit where if the veteran is receiving that payout from New York State's government, it does not count against their annual household income for the purposes of qualifying for a VA pension. Next slide. When you're looking at veterans and their families who are homeowners, who are still out in the community as independent living and who have their own property, you have the possibility they might be eligible for real property tax exemptions under New York State law. These applications go to their local tax assessor, but the Division of Veterans Affairs does provide assistance with veterans in completing these applications and filing them with the local assessors when needed. There are 3 different exemptions that New York State offers. A veteran can receive only one of them, so you can't double dip or triple dip. One of them is for Cold War veterans only, for residential property of a veteran who served during the Cold War period, which is September 2nd, 1945 to December 26, 1991, and who was discharged under honorable conditions. Again, doesn't have to be just honorable. For instance, general discharge under honorable conditions would still qualify. You have the alternative veterans tax exemption. That's the most common one that we deal with. This is with residential property of a veteran who served during a designated period of war or received an expeditionary medal. As with a VA pension, there is no requirement that the veteran actually go into a combat zone to receive this benefit. We're talking about wartime service, not combat service. As long as the service occurred, at least in part, during a wartime period as defined by Congress, that veteran would be eligible for the alternative veterans tax exemption. Now, if you have a veteran who owns real property and who is a combat veteran, that veteran is entitled to an additional increase in the exemption based on his or her combat service. Also, if you have a veteran with a service-connected disability rating of 10% or higher, that veteran is entitled to an additional amount of the exemption based on the severity of his or her disability. So if you have a veteran who has a 100% rating, that veteran is going to receive a greater amount on the exemption than, say, a veteran who has only a 20% rating from the VA. But any disability rating of 10% or higher will get the veteran an increased exemption above your baseline exemption that's available for all veterans who served during a wartime period. And then lastly, the least common of the 3, the eligible funds exemption, that's available for real property that a veteran's spouse, a veteran's dependent parent, or a veteran's child under age 21 purchased using money from a VA pension, prisoner of war compensation from the federal government, a bonus, or insurance money received upon discharge from the military. Next slide. There is an annuity that New York State provides to Gold Star parents. Gold Star parents, we look at the definition in federal law under Title 10 of the U.S. Code. Basically what we're talking about here is parents who have lost a child in combat. There are some private organizations out there that use a different definition of that term, Gold Star parent. However, the federal definition is the only definition by which New York State awards this annuity. The applicant must be a New York State resident, and the Gold Star annuitant receives a payment of $500 per year from the state government paid in 2 installments. It's important to note that if one parent applies, the second parent is also eligible to apply. So if you have a Gold Star mother who applies, and the Gold Star father is also a New York State resident, that Gold Star father can apply and receive the $500 per year annuity from the state as well. State veterans nursing homes. I want to mention these very quickly. I know that the bulk of your work focuses on helping individuals remain independent in community living. But if a time ever comes where an individual does need to go into a skilled nursing facility, there are 5 state veterans homes located throughout New York State, in Montrose, Oxford, St. Albans down in Queens, Batavia out near Buffalo, and Stony Brook on Long Island. And they provide both short-term and long-term skilled nursing care for veterans and for their spouses. I mention these because they are significantly less expensive than private nursing homes. And in fact, if a veteran has a disability rating of 70% or higher, the state veterans home provides skilled nursing care to that individual 100% free of charge. The VA reimburses the facility for their care, and there's no money coming out of pocket for that veteran. That means the veteran is able to keep his or her assets, able to keep his or her money that's coming in, say from disability compensation, from a VA pension, or whatever benefits they're receiving. And so it becomes an important way for that veteran, even though he or she needs skilled nursing care, to retain as much autonomy as possible. Also, there are certain state veterans nursing homes that offer what they call an adult daycare program. So it's for individuals who are not residents of the nursing home, but who are able to go to the state veterans home and receive a wide level of services on a daily basis, or on a regular basis if it's not daily. One of the state veterans homes that actually is known nationally for their adult daycare program is the state veterans home at SUNY Stony Brook. So if you work down in the Long Island area, or if you're in the 5 boroughs of New York City, that might be a resource to keep in mind if you have a veteran with whom you are working, or a veteran spouse with whom you are working, who doesn't need to go into a skilled nursing care facility full-time, but could possibly benefit from the adult daycare services that that facility provides. Next slide. Again, going back to a situation where you have somebody who's living in the community and is trying to get back into the workforce at some level to retain his or her independence. Section 55C of the State Civil Service Law establishes the Veterans with Disabilities Employment Program. It allows New York State to hire a veteran at an entry-level position with the state government without that veteran taking the civil service exam for that job. This is aimed at wartime veterans with disabilities. Importantly, again, to clear up a common misconception, the veteran's disability does not need to be service-connected in order for that veteran to qualify for this program. The veteran must meet all the minimum qualifications for the position in order to be hired. Again, the main benefit here is you avoid the additional step of the veteran, the civil service exam for that particular position. And a veteran hired under this program can still be hired by the state government during a hiring freeze. So it's a great way for veterans to enter public service, even if there is a hiring freeze in effect. And finally, we arrive at the last slide in the presentation, which really is the most important of all the slides we've gone over for the past 60 minutes. Incorporating this information into your work. I've tossed a lot of information at you during the past hour. I have a lawyer friend of mine who would say this is like taking a teacup sip from a fire hose. But what all this boils down to are a couple of very important concepts that can allow you to better serve the individuals with whom you work in the community. The most important thing to do is to ask the fundamental question, have you ever served in the military? And did someone in your immediate family ever serve in the military? Until you know the answers to those questions, you don't know if this whole universe of state and federal benefits and programs and services might be available for that particular individual with whom you're working. You have to ask that threshold question and get the response from them before you know what might be out there for them, depending on their current situation. And the second step, the second key step to this whole process is if the answer is yes to either of those questions, help that individual get in contact with the right resources, the right services to help them. And that package of services would include a New York State Division of Veterans Affairs Veterans Benefits Advisor, somebody who has that accreditation from the VA to represent them with federal benefits, who has the training and the skill set on the state benefits and programs and services side to help them in that regard, someone who can stand in their corner and be an advocate for that veteran or that veteran's family member without charging them a cent. And what I will do at the end of the presentation is to send out our directory to everyone who signed up for today's program. It contains all of our localized office information, address, phone numbers, and so on. And please feel free at any time to connect the veterans and their families with whom you work with our agency and with our localized offices in our agency that are closest to where all of you work, so they can get the best level of advocacy and care free of charge for the benefits and services that they've earned through their military service. So with that, I'll be happy to answer questions now. You see on the last slide here, my phone number is there as well as my email address, and happy to take questions later on if you think of a question a week from now or a month from now or a year from now by phone or email at any time. And lastly, one final pitch, you'll see the note about our free mobile app, both in the iPhone App Store and in the Google Play Store for Android users. I'd recommend downloading that app. It has a good resource for different benefits and programs that are out there, plus it has that Near Me feature to identify the different state offices and county offices nearest to you. And with that, any questions now?
Yes, we've got a few questions on here. The first one is more of a comment, which is saying, I've encountered a couple of vets who do not see themselves as a vet because they never left the states. So while you were talking about individuals not having to have served in combat, it also means that people don't have to have left the United States. They can, like you had given an example about somebody, serving only in New York State, but still being considered a veteran.
That's correct. I'll give one brief example of that. Recently, I was speaking with an individual who was talking about her husband. And she said, well, he was in the Air Force for a few years, but he was never a veteran. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? How come he was in the Air Force but not a veteran? And she was just stationed stateside for 4 years and never really got into any kind of a combat situation, and so therefore he's not a veteran. Well, of course, that's incorrect. It's an incorrect assumption that's made all too commonly. And it turned out, once I talked further with this individual, we were able to link her and her husband to a variety of different veterans benefits programs and services, including a very significant tax exemption, because not only was that individual a veteran, he actually was a wartime veteran because he served stateside during a period of war. So yes, it's a very common misconception that we encounter, and it's important in your work to help veterans and their families overcome that assumption by saying, no, if you served on active duty in the military, you are a veteran. You do qualify for veteran status, and therefore you may qualify for different veterans benefits from the federal government and or from the state. So that's a very good point.
Yes. And the next question is, you said an unremarried spouse for a blind annuity. Though the slide did not include that, is this the only benefit that's affected by remarriage for, after the death of a spouse who is a veteran?
There are certain other benefits that I didn't go into today on the state benefit side that would be affected by the remarriage of a spouse. But the blind annuity is the most common one that we deal with where remarriage would have an impact. Okay.
And then this is actually a really important question. Do the benefits advisors visit the nursing facilities, not necessarily the VA nursing facilities, but all the other ones to help an individual? So when we call these benefits advisors, are they going to connect up with the individual in the nursing home?
If necessary, yes, they will. And in addition to that, we have authorized them to go on home visits if needed. So if the veteran is unable to leave his or her residence, the Veterans Benefits Advisor will actually physically go to that veteran's residence or that dependent's residence and work with him or her at that location. They are not confined to the walls of their offices. They're able to go out into the nursing homes, into the individual homes when needed to work with veterans and their families.
Yeah, I think that question was probably asked because it's oftentimes difficult to call the individual in the nursing home. You know, they don't have their direct line. And so I think that's probably why that question was asked, is that if you just try to call a nursing home, you know, 50% of the time you wouldn't get through to them. So, and I do have someone who's raised their hand and would like to ask a question out loud. So Vanessa, I've unmuted you if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
I actually didn't have a question. Part of the presentation got cut out on my end periodically, and I was just trying to alert.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure that was you because you are cutting out right now. So I'm going to mute you back up.
Okay.
All right, so are there any other questions? I actually had a quick question. When you were talking all about the income requirements for pension, et cetera, you talked about that you could deduct the medical expenses. Do special needs trusts affect the income level? Like, do they discount what's going into a special needs trust just like a spend down does?
They do, yeah, and that gets into an area that we could talk about for the next hour, actually, if we all had time. The interaction between special needs trusts and VA pension benefits.
All right, but the short answer.
The simple answer is yes. There is an interaction definitely between special needs trusts and VA pension.
Okay. So with that, if there's no other questions, I just saw another one pop up. Hold on. How long does it take after someone is referred to the Department of Veterans Affairs to get back to the residence? Is there a timeline? So what's the timeline for when you give a call back and get in contact with the person?
The way it works with our field offices, if somebody calls in requesting services, we have a system set up where they will be scheduled for an appointment. And it depends on the office and how far out the office is booked with appointments, but an appointment to meet with the Veterans Benefits Advisor to discuss what that individual's situation is and what benefits he or she might be eligible for. Once that initial meeting takes place, the Veterans Benefits Advisor can then proceed with preparing all of the applications and working with the veteran to gather the necessary evidence to file the claim either with the VA or if it's a state benefit with the appropriate New York State entity. So as far as an exact timeline, it's going to vary between office to office and also benefit to benefit because there are certain disability compensation claims, for instance, that take significantly longer to prepare and file than others, depending on the level of evidence that the VA expects in order to grant that claim. One thing that we always strive to do in our agency is to always file what's called a fully developed claim with the VA. What that means is you take all of the evidence together and you package it up, give it to the VA, and you say, okay, I am attesting that everything that I want the VA to consider is in this claims package. I'm not going to be submitting any more evidence in support of my claim. And what the VA does then is they take that claim, and because it's fully developed, they put it into a fast-track system, which helps the VA decide it faster. So our goal in doing that is to get a faster resolution on the claims from the federal side by giving them everything they need up front, as opposed to handing them different pieces of evidence piecemeal as the process goes along. So that's always our goal, is to file a fully developed claim to get that faster answer from the VA.
Okay. Well, yeah. So, but I guess my question then becomes even stronger. It was Dickie's question actually about them going to see him. So it's always a face-to-face meeting, the first meeting that you have, or is it ever on the phone?
Most of the time it is. Sometimes it's on the phone, and of course, if the veteran requests the meeting to be on the phone as opposed to face-to-face, we'll do it by phone.
Right.
But in person tends to be better if possible, simply because a lot of times in the course of the conversation between the benefits advisor and the veteran, information comes out that could prove the veteran's eligibility for different benefits and services that veteran may not have even heard of before. Mm-hmm. There's so many misconceptions out there. There's so many benefits that are unknown to veterans and their families.
Absolutely.
That having that conversation is a very important thing.
Yeah, then you really are going to have to go to the nursing homes, because people in the nursing homes, there's really very, very little way they can get out to go to a meeting.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, we have another question. If you're disabled and get benefits, can you work as well?
That depends on the benefit that you're receiving. If you are receiving disability compensation from the VA for a service-connected disability, most of the time the answer is going to be yes. You can still work even though you have a disability rating from the VA and still receive those disability compensation benefits. There is one caveat to that, and that is the VA will sometimes increase a veteran's payment in disability compensation by assigning them a status known as individual unemployability. That means that in the VA's estimation, the individual's disability is severe enough, or their collection of disabilities is severe enough, that it prevents that person from maintaining and retaining steady employment. And so in that situation, if an individual does go and obtain substantial gainful employment, then he or she likely will lose that individually unemployable status. But for the most part, for disability compensation, you can have a disability rating and work in any job that you are able to obtain. On the VA pension side, there is no specific prohibition on holding a job. However, it's important to note, of course, the income and asset thresholds that the VA imposes. And so having a full-time job most likely will push the veteran and or his or her dependents over that income threshold. So there's no outright prohibition on working there, but the job might lead to too much income in order to receive that benefit.
Okay. So I think at least my takeaway from this is really that there's a whole lot of benefits out there, and that these DVA benefits advisors really are the key to accessing whatever the person's eligible for. So if you do have somebody who is a veteran or has a parent, a child, a spouse who is a veteran, that it's worth a phone call and worth making that referral to that DVA benefits advisor.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's one of those things where it's really a no-lose situation for you and the clients whom you serve. We mentioned before, we're a state agency. We do not charge a cent for any services that we provide to veterans and their families. And so if you think that someone might be eligible for any of the different services that we've talked about today, or for something else that you may have heard about, there's no harm in making that referral to a Veterans Benefits Advisor. The worst that the Veterans Benefits Advisor can come back with is, okay, we had the conversation with the veteran, we looked at every possible angle, there's nothing out there for which he or she is eligible. That's the worst case scenario. There's no loss to the veteran in that situation. And a lot of times when those conversations take place, veterans and their families learn that they're eligible for benefits that, again, they never knew existed, either on the state side or on the federal side or both. And there are times, many times, where these benefits and these services can truly change a veteran's life as far as helping them maintain their independence in the community. So it's a definite link with the great work and the important work that you do, and we would like to assist with that work in any way that we can on the realm of our work, connecting veterans and their families to the benefits that they've earned.
Mm-hmm. And one last question, this will be the last question. If you had mentioned that the children under 18 or 18 to 23 and in school are eligible for some benefits, does this extend to disabled adult children, so children older than 23 but who have lifetime disability?
It does in certain situations. So, for instance, when you're looking at the VA pension realm, that there are cases that involve adult disabled children who can qualify for that pension eligibility. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Benjamin. I know we went over a little bit on your time. I appreciate you sticking around to answer questions. And, you know, if there's any other questions, feel free to email, and I will be emailing everyone a copy of the PowerPoint as well as all the handouts with the contact information for the DVA benefits advisors.
Great, and thank you for the work that all of you do, and please keep in touch.
Thank you.